The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has flown into Washington, D.C. ahead of his address to a joint sitting of the US Congress. For more, Global Affairs editor John Lyons joins me now in the studio. John, good to see you. How do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is going to frame this speech?
Well, Catherine, it's a complicated speech for a number of reasons. Obviously, American politics is in flux. Also, for him, he's meeting a president as well, President Biden, who has said openly that he thinks Israel has been losing international support by its indiscriminate bombing. Now, the indiscriminate bombing of highly densely populated civilian areas fits the definition of many people of war crimes. So that's the climate of the White House into which Benjamin Netanyahu flies. However, he has more support amongst the Republican side of politics who have driven this speech. He will become the foreign leader who's spoken to the Congress more than any other foreign leader tomorrow. He passes the record previously set by Winston Churchill, which was 3 times. This will be the 4th time for Benjamin Netanyahu in his different incarnations as Prime Minister. And he flies into a country where even 50% of Democrat supporters say that they oppose what Israel and the US supplying it is doing in Gaza. So it's politically a tricky visit.
Do you think he's speaking to Congress people, or is he speaking to the American public as well? Because we know that this is just months out from when they will be voting for their new leader.
Well, both, I think. The Congress is crucial in terms of funding, support, financing of Israel. Most of the bombs Israel's dropping at the moment on Gaza are American supplied. Israel ran out of a lot of its own supplies early in the war. It's dropped tens of thousands of bombs on Gaza, and they're coming from America all the time. So he has to try to shore up, particularly that Republican side. He will also be going down to Florida to meet Donald Trump in a separate meeting. Donald Trump in the past has made clear his dislike of Benjamin Netanyahu, so it's clear the Israeli Prime Minister wants to try to hedge his bets as well.
OK, so while Benjamin Netanyahu is in the United States, China has been working pretty hard diplomatically, having success in getting a bunch of Palestinian factions to sit down together and talk about the Middle East.
It's fascinating watching China's game here. Everyone focuses on America's role with Gaza. Meanwhile, what China has done is got 14 of the Palestinian factions together, including the 2 main ones, Hamas and Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, and has essentially got them to sign a Beijing declaration, it's called, on the rebuilding of Gaza. So China's being very pragmatic and saying, when the war is over, let's get together the plan. Who funds it? Who rebuilds Gaza? Now, to watch China moving into this space, only last year, China brokered an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. They sat them down together and tried to get them to lower the temperature in their political battles. And China, when I was in Ukraine last year, Xi Jinping had rung Volodymyr Zelensky and said, I'm appointing an envoy who will fly between Kyiv and Moscow to try to find an agreement in that war, an end to that war. So there's 3 conflicts that China is now actively involved in trying to do, a role that America once would have played.
Yeah, so do you see this as being the moment of China's real rise in diplomacy here? Will it find solutions in the Middle East, in Europe, where the US hasn't been able to date?
I think so. The reality now, America's standing in the Middle East. I've spent a lot of time there. I've just come back again from the Middle East. America's standing in the Middle East is close to zero. It is held quite openly with contempt because it is seen as having been complicit in the massive killing of civilians in Gaza. Now, a lot of the Arab countries in the Middle East will not talk to America anymore. They don't see them as an honest broker. So it could, in fact, be China who ends up coming up with some sort of peace agreement in Gaza. China is the one driving the peace deal between the Iranians and the Saudis, which has got massive implications if the Sunni and Shia world come together. It's China who might bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Donald Trump keeps saying it'll be him. Meanwhile, keep our eye on China. China, not just economically, has risen. It has now decided it wants to be an international player.
So where does this, with all this going on, where does this leave the war in Gaza?
The war in Gaza continues to be a humanitarian catastrophe. We've seen the polio outbreaks. We know there's famine abroad there. We know that tens of thousands of women and children killed. The doctors there are saying still things are desperate. The bombs are still being dropped. People are herding themselves into safe zones, designated safe zones by the Israeli army. They are then being bombed and killed in those safe zones. So it is one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of our lifetime. And I think when they finally do allow foreign media in there, the Israelis won't allow any in at the moment, I think we will see that it is so much worse and so much catastrophic. And we'll see that essentially Gaza has been reduced to an unlivable rubble, which then poses the question, which is what China is looking at. What happens then for the 2.3 million people of Gaza? It's interesting, it's China looking at that question, not the US.
John Lyons, as always, many thanks for joining us.